Donald Trump appears to be in a state of visible political disarray and mounting anxiety following a deeply embarrassing and consequential setback in the state of Indiana, a defeat that has dealt a serious blow to his broader political strategy and exposed the limits of his influence within his own party. The Indiana State Senate decisively rejected an aggressive redistricting effort that was widely viewed as being designed to reshape congressional maps in a way that would benefit Trump-aligned interests, a move that Trump and his allies had pushed forcefully in the hope of securing additional congressional seats. What has made this defeat particularly striking is not merely the outcome itself, but the events that followed immediately afterward. Shortly after the vote, Trump addressed reporters from the Oval Office and attempted to downplay the importance of the Indiana redistricting effort altogether, presenting it as something he had never truly prioritized. He claimed that he had not been paying close attention to the issue and suggested that it was never central to his political agenda. However, this attempt at revisionism stood in stark contrast to the intensity of his earlier involvement, a contradiction that became increasingly apparent as details emerged. Before examining those facts, it is important to note how Trump appeared while discussing the loss. His tone was defensive, his explanations inconsistent, and his demeanor reflected a leader struggling to reconcile public defeat with personal claims of dominance. Just hours earlier, the Indiana State Senate had formally voted down the proposed congressional redistricting plan, with a notable number of Republican senators joining in opposition. When questioned about this development, and reminded that senior figures from his political circle had actively traveled to Indiana to advocate for the plan, Trump responded by asserting that he had won nearly every other state and that Indiana was merely an exception. He emphasized that he had carried Indiana by large margins in multiple elections and suggested that he had not invested much effort into the redistricting push, adding that, if he had done so, additional seats might have been secured. He then went on to single out a senior state legislative leader, suggesting that this individual's opposition to the plan would likely result in political consequences during a future primary election, remarks that carried an unmistakable tone of retaliation. Trump continued by praising the state and its voters, repeating claims of overwhelming electoral support and record-breaking vote totals, while simultaneously expressing frustration that such loyalty had not translated into legislative compliance. Throughout this response, Trump oscillated between claiming detachment from the process and expressing clear resentment over its outcome, an inconsistency that underscored the broader contradiction at the heart of his remarks. As more information came to light, it became evident that Trump's claim of limited involvement did not align with reality. Evidence revealed that Trump had been directly and repeatedly engaged in efforts to pressure Indiana lawmakers in the lead-up to the vote. Public statements demonstrated that he had warned legislators of serious political repercussions should they refuse to approve the proposed redistricting maps, framing their compliance as a test of loyalty to party and country. He had explicitly indicated that support and opposition in future elections would be influenced by how lawmakers voted on this issue, signaling an intent to use political endorsements as leverage. The language used in these warnings left little ambiguity and was widely interpreted as an attempt to coerce state-level officials into advancing a federally consequential political objective. These actions made it increasingly difficult to accept Trump's later assertions that the matter had been of little importance to him. The pressure campaign extended beyond Trump himself, as organizations closely aligned with his political agenda amplified the message. Prior to the vote, warnings were issued suggesting that Indiana could face severe consequences if the legislature failed to comply, including the potential loss of federal funding for infrastructure projects, disaster relief, and other essential services. Such statements represented an extraordinary escalation, implying that residents of the state could be collectively punished for the decisions of their elected representatives. These warnings were not subtle suggestions but explicit threats that framed legislative independence as defiance deserving of retribution. Additional figures from Trump's political network were dispatched to Indiana to apply further pressure, reinforcing the message that this vote was being closely watched and that dissent would not be forgotten. Despite this coordinated effort, when the final vote was tallied, the redistricting proposal was overwhelmingly defeated by a wide margin, demonstrating that resistance within the state legislature was both substantial and resolute. The lopsided nature of the vote made clear that this was not a narrow or technical disagreement, but a decisive rejection of the proposed plan. The outcome represented a significant setback not only for Trump's immediate objectives, but also for the faction within the legislature that had aligned itself closely with his approach. In contrast, several Republican senators demonstrated a willingness to withstand intense pressure, choosing instead to oppose what they viewed as an improper or harmful course of action. The aftermath of the vote revealed deep divisions within the party and raised serious concerns about the methods employed to secure political compliance. The controversy intensified further as national attention turned to the broader implications of the pressure campaign. In interviews following the vote, some Trump-aligned federal representatives suggested that punitive measures against the state could be justified, framing politics as a zero-sum contest in which cooperation is rewarded and defiance punished. Such remarks sparked widespread criticism as they appeared to endorse the idea that essential public resources could be withheld for political reasons. This stance alarmed many observers, who argued that it undermined democratic principles and blurred the line between governance and coercion. Meanwhile, reactions within Indiana grew increasingly volatile. Senior state officials publicly expressed anger over the outcome and openly discussed efforts to challenge or replace lawmakers who had voted against the plan, portraying the legislature as an obstacle to ideological goals rather than an independent governing body. Amid this escalating rhetoric, several state senators came forward to describe the extraordinary level of intimidation they had faced. Some reported receiving direct threats, including threats to their personal safety, as a result of their stance on the redistricting vote. One veteran lawmaker spoke emotionally about the moral weight of the decision, explaining that yielding to fear would have compromised his ability to justify his actions to future generations. He described reflecting on the kind of political environment such intimidation would create, and concluded that accepting threats as a normal part of governance would endanger democratic norms. This testimony highlighted the severity of the pressure campaign and reframed the debate as one not merely about electoral maps, but about the integrity of democratic institutions. The lawmaker acknowledged that some critics might argue his position was easier to take because he was nearing the end of his political career, but he rejected that notion, stating that personal consequences were secondary to the principle at stake. He recounted how his decision to enter public service years earlier had been questioned even by those closest to him, yet he believed that moments like this one defined the true purpose of leadership. His remarks resonated widely, emphasizing that the events in Indiana were not simply a routine political dispute, but part of a larger struggle over how power is exercised and challenged within a democracy. The developments that followed the Indiana State Senate's rejection of the redistricting proposal revealed an even deeper political crisis surrounding Donald Trump and his influence within the Republican Party, as the fallout exposed internal divisions